This is Alexander Kriss, a clinical psychologist and author based in New York. He's also written extensively about video games and Silent Hill 2 in particular in his book The Gaming Mind. Today, Alex joins us to analyze the game's monsters, break down all of Silent Hill 2's endings, and discuss why he finds the game's opaque methods for unlocking each ending so fascinating. Be warned, there are spoilers for the whole game from the very start of this video.
You know, this was me. This is the obsessive player. He keeps going back over and over again just to plumb every depth and look in every corner. And this ending is the game saying, like, it's over. There's nothing more here. You're done with Silent Hill 2, but you can't let go, right? And so what you get as your reward for that is this portrayal of James truly lost.
You can find links to Alex's books, including The Gaming Mind, in the description below. If there are any other games you'd like to see Alex break down, let us know in the comment section beneath this video. But without further ado, it's over to Alex.
So generally speaking, right, there's this idea that all the faces are obscure. There are no faces on any of the monsters that James fights, and that could be a direct allusion to him, you know, smothering Mary under a pillow, right, or not being able to look at her face, and being able to therefore carry out this act over and over again in Silent Hill with these monsters because they don't have a face, right? And that dehumanizes them. And I think there's also something to be said about, in that act of dehumanization, it speaks to James's sort of resentment and disgust he came to develop for Mary's body, right? As she became more and more ill. And so all of these monsters are a kind of perversion of bodily forms and seem to both validate James's idea that the body is horrible and bad, but also forces him over and over again to confront what he did, right, which was to kill an ill body. So, you know, for the most part, I think the design was very preserved in spirit and just made more HD, right, in this version. You know, then there's Pyramid Head, which kind of is its own subject matter. You know, there are so many different takes that people have had on Pyramid Head over the years, right? Unlike in the original Silent Hill, which is very mired in lore about the town, Silent Hill 2 mostly skips all of that for the better and really just has it be about the psychological meaning of being in this place for these people. But there is little tidbits we get here and there, particularly in the sequences in the Historical Society. There is this idea of Pyramid Head serving as the executioner, right? Which is a very particular role, right? It's not the judge or the jury, right? James is already guilty, and now there's this creature who is sort of assigned to mete out justice. But, you know, the first time that they meet, Pyramid Head kind of walks away from him, and it's not exactly clear what punishment is deserved. There are a few encounters when he knocks James off of the ceiling, the roof rather, of the hospital, right? Is that intended to kill him, or is there just this effort to continually push him forward and drive him onward on this journey? I think in many ways that really is Pyramid Head's role, right? Is to kind of keep James on a course towards reckoning with his previous actions. I mean, the pyramid is just a cool, bizarre design, right? There's this sense of, you know, an executioner wears a hood, and this is this gonzo, exaggerated version of that, right? It makes it so over the top that this thing has no face, right? It's a acceleration of the other kinds of things that James is fighting. With really, other than Eddie, right, who's a person, right, then the next thing that he fights that actually has like a face and somewhat humanoid features is Mary Maria. Who's this kind of amalgam of a person and a metal bed and sort of mechanical monster.
James.
So I was in high school when Silent Hill 2 came out. I'd been a big fan of the original. It had really entranced me on the PS1. And it was happening to me at a very particular time in my life. The year before, I had lost a very close friend of mine to suicide and was still kind of very much in the grips of dealing with that tragic and disorienting event. Around the time that Silent Hill 2 came out, I also started therapy for the first time, which, as evident by my career, had a major effect on my life and my sort of the beginning of my journey of looking at things through a psychological lens. But sort of separate from that, I was also just becoming very obsessed with Silent Hill 2. It was a game that I played over and over again. I became very involved in fandom such as it existed in the early 2000s. I was on message boards. I dressed up as James for Halloween one year. The position I've come to as a psychologist is this curiosity about how people play games, not just what they play, but the idiosyncratic ways that people engage with anything that you might play. When you really take time to talk to people about their relationship with games, you often find interesting personal ways that they participate with a game in terms of particular play style, right? Characters they favor in a game where you select your character, ways that they try to break the game or, manipulate it in some way, and many, many permutations. And Silent Hill 2, one of the things that made it such a revolutionary entry into interactive art that I don't know how well it's really ever been rivaled in this way is that it takes the way you play so seriously by monitoring seemingly arbitrary or benign actions that are not the typical ways that we think about, how a game keeps track of our behavior or determines an ending and uses that to determine what you see at the end of the game. Like, I think anyone, I had my own idiosyncratic style of play, which I wasn't really aware of or didn't really pause to think about until many years later when I was a psychologist. Silent Hill 2 is not something I talked about in therapy because, as I often find with people I work with now, we don't necessarily think that the games that we're playing are the kinds of things that one ought to talk about in therapy. But actually, I played Silent Hill 2 in a very particular way. Despite playing it probably a dozen times, got every nook and cranny, new game plus mode, all that stuff, but I never, ever, on my own, saw the in-water ending, which is the ending that requires a particular play style in which you spend a lot of time at low health and looking at Angela's knife and, a few of these sort of opaque triggers that the game had set up. It was really only in retrospect, years later, that I came to appreciate how the way I was playing the game really said a lot about where I was at that point in my life. For a number of reasons, and certainly dealing with the loss of my friend, getting too close to death was just not appealing to me. There's something about being in this horrific world, but staying, always drinking one of those, whatever the health, what are they? The health tonics that, and trying to sort of maintain a certain distance from what I knew from reading online was the ending in which James committed suicide.
Now I understand the real reason I came to this town. I wonder, what was I afraid of?
And so Silent Hill for me has evolved over time from just a game that I was passionate about as a player to something that I really feel like said something about who I was and is an example of how we can really learn about ourselves by asking not just what we play, but how we play. It has really these 4 core original endings. I'll leave aside the dog stuff and the joke stuff, at least for now. The leave ending is the ending in which James is essentially forgiven by Mary.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. I told you. I wanted the pain to end.
She frames what he did as a mercy killing that she asked for and says that she wants him to go on and be happy, and you see him leaving with Laura and somewhat inexplicably like he's now going to be a father or something. And that's the end. It's one of the great subversions of Silent Hill in terms of what our expectations are around games with multiple endings and horror stories, where this seems to be the happy ending, right? James is forgiven, he gets to leave, but it rings hollow and weird. And most importantly, it's the ending that is easiest to achieve. Usually, even with the first Silent Hill, it's when you do the extra stuff and you play through multiple times that you get the good ending. But in Silent Hill 2, the good ending is just meted out freely. My understanding of that has been that the game is rewarding players who didn't really do anything special with a pretty unspecial ending, right? A sort of rote ending that is not really a satisfactory conclusion or resolution of the torment and strangeness that James has just experienced. It's false and, speaks to a player who maybe was not plumbing the depths of what Silent Hill 2 has to offer and James's world. Then you have the Maria ending, in which the player has to lavish attention on this doppelganger that James meets early on in the game by not like bumping into her or hitting her with stuff. And these really minute things, visiting her a lot, right, when she's gets ill and weirdly decides to just sort of lie down in the disgusting Silent Hill hospital, right? Another one of these incongruous things where no one makes a big deal out of something that seems like such a bad idea. And so here the game says, okay, so this is a player who is really invested in this two-dimensional version of Mary that is sort of handed to James at the beginning of the game. This, blonder, more sexualized version of Mary who promises to be everything that real person who really got sick, couldn't be. And so what they're treated to is James fighting the real Mary as the final boss and then leaving Silent Hill with Maria, who then starts coughing as they get into the car, suggesting that this whole thing is going to happen again. James, I think this is true in both versions, right? In this very flat way, says like,
better do something about that cough. It's
so clear that the denial has not lifted, right? That he's so far in it still that we start to see already this person who is only going to be willing to go so far to take care of the person he loves is alive and well. And then you have In Water, right? This was the ending that I avoided when I was a teenager, where James has to stay at low health. He looks at Angela's knife often, and this ends with James driving his car into Toluca Lake. It's a reflection of a player who is not taking James's life seriously, right? By sort of playing it fast and loose, staying at low health. There's this sense of the player doesn't value James's life, and so James, by the end, doesn't value his own life and chooses as a way to resolve his guilt, just completely opting out of life altogether. And then lastly, of the original endings, there's the Rebirth ending, where you have to have beaten the game at least once, right? Be in New Game Plus mode, where you go around and collect a handful of curios that have no discernible meaning over the course of the game, and then it results in James refusing to believe that Mary is actually dead or must stay dead, and is seen rowing with her body out to some far off point on the other side of the lake to speak to the old gods and engage in some kind of mad ritual. This was me. This is the obsessive player. He keeps going back over and over again just to plumb every depth and look in every corner. And this ending is this way of the game saying, like, it's over. There's nothing more here, right? Like you're done with Silent Hill 2, but you can't let go, right? And so what you get as your reward for that is this portrayal of James truly lost in a way that, is different from any other version, where he is not only denying his responsibility, his behaviors, but he's denying the reality of death itself.
Power to defy even death.
Those are the sort of core endings in my thoughts about sort of how it not only reflects the different paths that James can go down in terms of how he resolves the conflicts of Silent Hill 2, but how it really speaks to trying to provide the player with a reflection of how they approached Silent Hill 2 and how they might have felt on some level about their participation in the game. And then there are these new endings. So, these new endings are, right, they're New Game Plus endings. They're more traditional in the sense of like it's not the same kind of weird calculus to determine it. It's sort of like you find an item, you use that item. That's how the multiple endings worked in the original Silent Hill. So it doesn't really fit this idea of the game trying to sort of suss out what kind of player you were. So in Bliss, he finds a liquid form of White Claudia, which is like a shout out to Silent Hill fans, right? That goes back to the first game, where White Claudia is this drug that was being synthesized that the cultists were using to make money by selling it to tourists. And also this nurse got addicted to it. It's a whole thing. It's some kind of powerful hallucinogen that's native to Silent Hill. And James takes it, and we see a alternate version of the videotape in which he does not kill Mary. And then it sort of almost seems to suggest that he's been sucked into the TV and is now living in this two-dimensional fantasy land, even the sort of unreality of Silent Hill was like too real. And so he has escaped into a dream within a dream, I guess you could say. Right. And so then there's Stillness, which also is unlocked in a sort of standard way. You find a postcard, you look at the postcard, and then you beat the game. So I still don't know what I make of this.
I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
What's the, like, can you tell me, like, what's the word on the street? What is this supposed to be about?
So this actually kind of falls into fan theory stuff, and I was kind of curious where you fell in this camp, because before this game was even in conception, the remake was in conception, there was a debate on whether or not Mary's body was in James's car the entire time. Are you aware of that theory?
Yeah, that rings a vague bell. There's also the idea, right, that he maybe never leaves his car, like his sort of the entire experience is like happening in his mind and he's like in the car the whole time.
This is obviously something that was never confirmed in the original, was never alluded to. You couldn't look in the car, but this is a fan theory that people had. This ending essentially makes that canon, that her body was indeed in the back seat. And it's even pushed further that if you like clip the camera through the car in the opening of the game, you can see a blanket in the back seat that is like mounted in such a way that reveals a body is underneath it.
Like a body that's been dead for 3 years? Is that the idea?
No, so that's the other fan theory. Mary's only been dead for like a day. But there was an ongoing sort of fan theory, which I always just kind of wrote off as fan fiction. People believe that this game begins moments after James killed Mary, and that he's living, that the world you're in is this sort of, obviously this delusional view, but to him, Mary's been dead for years. The other idea is in the opening of this remake, you see James like touch his hands. He does that again after he kills Eddie. So there's this idea and this connection that's like a thing he does, or he starts to do, or has done after committing one horrible act, and then killing Eddie makes him do it again. The fact that you don't really have a reaction to it, I think, is interesting.
Yeah, I think, though that element of lore, I think maybe never really is what drew me to this. What they've done here, it sounds like, you really have to dig to find it, and it's still open for interpretation, right? I like the way that Silent Hill 2 has elements of being a blank screen that you can project ideas onto, because it is not overly concerned with things that other installments in the series are, like sort of the specific lore of the town, and that you can really go deep on but lose track of the metaphor and meaning of the game. Here, I think Silent Hill 2 really is a robust enough work that it can be subject to multiple interpretations. I know that fan theories can often demand an answer, right? So so what is canon? I certainly think it's an interesting idea that everything that we experience, right, is some kind of dream, right? As I've said before, that is the vibe, certainly, of Silent Hill 2. I don't know that I have a strong reaction to this. It's the most emotional we ever see James, which is maybe kind of interesting, right? He like cries for a moment here, which is not a reaction that we've seen from him otherwise, I don't think. Yeah, I don't really know how I feel about it. In the spirit of the game, I find it just less interesting, right? I think it's common. It's what people, what developers do in many games that have multiple endings, are these sort of on-off switches that you can hit in one way or another. But I think that what is most interesting about Silent Hill 2, in terms especially of its ending mechanic, is this way that it tries to kind of read the player and its opacity, right? It's not clear as you're playing what matters. Whereas, finding a special item and using it at the right time is more on the nose, right? Less mysterious, less obscure, in this way that it's such a big part of the Silent Hill experience, is this idea that as you're playing the game, there's this sense of like the game is also kind of watching and playing you, and you don't entirely understand when or why it matters. And, you are walking in the hospital and you turn around because you realize you want to go the other way, and you bump into Maria and she goes, ow. And you think like, oh, like, what did that just do? That is part of what I think is such a thrilling thing about Silent Hill. It's one of the things that makes it so unique as a video game experience, right? That the story wouldn't work the same way as a movie, right? It is this dynamic interaction between what James is going through and what the player is going through.
Thanks for checking up on me. It's very sweet of you.
Yeah,
there was a string of games in the late 2000s, 2010s that I think in some ways not directly related to, but inspired by what Silent Hill 2 put out there, that really played around with the idea of the meta experience of what how you play a game, right? And what that means, right? So things like BioShock and Portal and Stanley Parable, right? These sort of games that were interested in how the player is an active participant in the characters, the avatars, right? Sort of actions. I don't know if there's another example of a game that tried to sort of give you an ending based on the minutia of how you played it. I think that's still pretty unique. It's something that's very satisfying, I think, about Silent Hill 2, is the sense of the game is like paying attention to you in a way. I think it's generally really exciting that it's retained this reputation enough to merit a remake like this and potentially expose a new generation of people to what I think is a kind of landmark work in the history of video games. I think it is a game that is not as alone on a peak as it was in 2001 in terms of the themes that it is exploring. But, one is hard pressed to find an interactive experience that is so willing to delve into the dark side of loss, into despair and disgust and guilt, and consider questions of hope and change that is, grim and difficult, but not just sort of nihilistic or going out of its way to try to make you feel bad. I think it's just a really special game, and I hope that people continue to think about it and take it seriously, just like, any major artwork that sort of forces us to look at ourselves and the way that we interact with the artwork in a new way.
Thanks again to Alex for joining us. Don't forget you can find links to his books, including The Gaming Mind, in the description below. Also, be sure to leave us a comment with any other games you'd like to see on the show in the future, and be sure to subscribe for more content like this and beyond.